Well, hello to all of my methodical researchers out there. Today we are going to talk about agency websites. These can provide a really convenient way of accessing the administrative law that these agencies create, especially when we start to venture outside of the world of regulations and start looking at the wider array of different administrative materials that are out there. And this video will also serve as your brief introduction to administrative decisions and guidance documents. Now, obviously, these agency websites are going to vary quite a bit, but we'll try to focus the most on the common features that you'll encounter quite frequently in different agency websites. We're going to go ahead and stick with the FTC for this video, and for the most part, this agency does have a high quality website, so you won't necessarily see all of the different features, sources, and documents that we're going to go over here available on every agency website that you might go to. So on our front page here, we're usually going to see various press releases and other consumer-facing links. This is going to be the information that the agency really wants to highlight for the public. Most of this information, especially press releases, could actually be considered to be a sort of source of administrative law because it is created by the agency, right? You might call it very informal guidance, but it usually isn't what you're looking for when you're doing legal research and you need to find administrative law. So as an attorney doing research on an agency website like this, you're going to want to look for the agency's regulatory portal. If an agency has one, it's going to pull together all of the agency's administrative materials in one place or maybe a couple of related places. Sometimes it might be called regulations. That makes it really easy to find. Sometimes there might be a section entitled for attorneys or for advocates or something like that. In some situations, the agency might not really have a regulatory portal, either because it doesn't publish enough administrative materials or just because it doesn't have a great website. Here we actually have two different regulatory portals, each with sort of a different focus. So our first one is going to be this enforcement section, and our second one is going to be policy here. So we'll go ahead and navigate to enforcement. And this enforcement page, you can see that it collects just a wide variety of different administrative materials that are created by the FTC in this process of enforcing its statutes and enforcing its regulations. We don't really have time to go over all of these, so we're just going to try to focus on administrative decisions and guidance documents because those are just really important categories of administrative law materials. So first, let's just look at cases and proceedings here. Now, many agencies are going to have some sort of quasi-judicial capacity, where it sets up some type of process where the agency resolves disputes that might arise under the regulations and rules that it creates. The FTC's structure here is pretty typical. An administrative law judge or an ALJ is generally going to decide these regulatory administrative cases in the first instance. The ALJ will also do all of the fact-finding. They'll compile the administrative record. And after that, the parties may decide to appeal to the commission itself, which are going to vote on the case, write opinions, much like any appellate court, although obviously the commissioners for the FTC have other responsibilities aside from deciding these decisions. And if it's not a multi-member commission that heads the agency, you might find that the decision would go up from the ALJ to the secretary herself, to make that final decision. So here in our cases and proceedings category, we can see that it collects various documents from these different quasi-judicial proceedings, and the FTC as an agency also brings actions that originate in federal district court, which you see here labeled as federal. You would probably be able to find these as well on Westlaw or Lexis, just with the rest of the federal district court decisions. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the sidebar here, you can see that you do have some ability to search these case proceedings, but it's really pretty limited. So, if you're doing some serious, research that involves, FTC administrative decisions, you're probably going to want to start your research on Westlaw or Lexis. And to do that on Westlaw, you would go to Administrative Decisions and Guidance here. Then you would choose All Federal Administrative Decisions and Guidance. Then FTC is an independent agency, Federal Trade Commission. And you're actually going to find those FTC decisions under order. Sometimes the nomenclature can be a little confusing. So, when you do look at these sources, you're always going to want to, check your scope note to see, what it includes. Now, if you were able to use Westlaw to find like a relevant administrative decision, you could go back to this agency website and maybe find some related documents, maybe the briefs, maybe the initial determination by the ALJ that might help to give you some background about that particular administrative case. Now, also under cases and proceedings here, we do see, really a variety of different categories. Some of these are more kind of self-explanatory than others. I don't really have time to go over all of them, but I think it does at least demonstrate just the wide range of different materials out there, even under this one category. Now, as a category, in general, administrative decisions do tend to vary quite a bit from agency to agency as far as, maybe what's available and even really how significant they are. Some agencies, create a lot of administrative law through these decisions, and some agencies just don't use that process at all. They maybe focus more on promulgating regulations. So that's the reason you're usually going to want to find some sort of research guide or speak to your colleagues to get an idea of what administrative decisions will look like in a particular area of law and where you might find them. But for the purposes of this course, I really just want you to be familiar with administrative decisions conceptually and know, really the basics of how to approach finding them. You don't really need to worry so much about all of the little details, especially since they just vary so much. If you scroll down, to the different categories of sources that are available here, you can see that we have rules and statutes. And under these categories, pretty self-explanatory. You're going to find, all of the agency's various regulations as well as its enabling statutes. And these are all materials that you would probably usually be just better off researching elsewhere if you could. Although it is convenient at least to have them in this one place so you can at least know, this is everything that the FTC really deals with. Now, our next really super important category are guidance documents. Now, under guidance documents, you're going to find all of the agency's formal guidance. And that simply means that these are documents that represent its views about issues that are under its regulatory purview. Guidance has not gone through that rulemaking process that we discussed a few videos back. So it isn't mandatory authority like in the same way that a regulation would be mandatory, but it is important because it gives you a sense of how the agency will enforce and interpret its statutes and regulations and how it plans to regulate different issues that are under its mandate. And we can see here on our sidebar that we do have some limited ability to search through these guidance documents, but it's not going to be anywhere near as powerful as what you're accustomed to from like using Westlaw or Lexis. However, a lot of these are only going to be available on this agency website and might not be available on those platforms. Now, guidance is an interesting category because it can encompass just a very wide range of materials. And a lot of the guidance will be about how the FTC interprets its enabling statutes and the various regulations that it has promulgated. A good example of this would be this statement of basis and purpose for these revisions to their jewelry regulations. You could take a look at that here. And here we're basically getting the FTC's justification for the rules in this area, as well as its thoughts on how it's going to interpret those rules on various different issues that are likely to arise. If you are working in this industry, it's something you would definitely want to know, because even though, the rules might not specify these particular interpretations for the different issues that might come up, the FTC has given you this guidance document that really lets you know its thoughts on the matter already. And as a practical matter, it's very likely that they would enforce the rules in the way that it sets out in this guidance. Now, in addition, the FTC guidance documents are also going to collect the FTC's reports on various industries and areas where it may not currently be doing a lot of regulation, but where it has concerns and it wants to potentially regulate issues in the future. An example of this would be this report on mobile security issues. And this gives you an idea of just the range of different documents that are available. If we take a look at it here. Now, if you were a company in this area, you would probably want to comply with the FTC's recommendations here, because even though they haven't really established many regulations as of this point in time, they are studying the area. They're trying to give the industry an idea of what those regulations might possibly look like so they can plan ahead. That's the whole idea behind a guidance document like this, as well as collecting the results of the different studies that the agency has done. Now, in general, guidance documents like these are going to be pretty important if you're practicing within a heavily regulated industry or area of law. And if that is the case, you're usually going to just become intimately familiar with the nature of that guidance in your area of practice as you gain experience. The method that you would employ for researching them is going to vary a lot, however, depending on the agency, depending on the area of law. So until you've achieved that familiarity, you're going to want to consult with colleagues who might be more experienced, or look at a research guide on that area of law to know sort of the role that this guidance plays, and know about some of the more significant resources that might fall under this category. Now, those are the chief sources that I wanted to cover in this context of agency websites, but let's take a quick look at the policy page as well, another regulatory portal. And this one gives us access to more informal forms of guidance from the agency, such as these advisory opinions, where the agency staff gives opinions on various issues at the request of interested parties like people within regulated industries. Reports can also be a very useful resource. That's where the agency states its findings and views on different issues and areas that it regulates. It's not substantively different from the guidance that we looked at, but it just hasn't went through quite as formal as a process, so the agency isn't classifying it as guidance necessarily. Similarly, we have our policy statements, and these policy statements relate specifically to how the agency views and interprets its statutes and regulations. And of course, there is really a lot of overlap here with the guidance documents that we looked at under the enforcement category. And finally, in other parts of this agency website, we can also find other just real practical guidance about how to comply with FTC regulations. And lots of agency websites will have a similar resource available. So for the FTC, it's under tips and advice, and then we go to the Business Center. And we have basically a guide to complying with the telemarketing sales rule. And it just tells us, exactly what we need to do to comply with that TSR. And it's not necessarily going to be as helpful as some other sources if you have like a really ambiguous legal issue that arises under that regulation. But it can be a pretty good place to start if you don't know that much about the regulatory scheme in the area of law that you're researching, because it really just tries to give you an overview in very plain language. So yeah, that is an agency website, and also kind of a brief introduction to administrative decisions and guidance documents, two really important sources of administrative law. Agency websites can be extremely convenient and will sometimes be a better way to access many administrative materials than dedicated research platforms like Westlaw or Lexis. And that's especially the case for agency guidance, which can just be hard to find on those platforms if it is available at all. However, the utility really is going to vary a lot depending on the website itself. Now, with the FTC, we could see that the range of materials available on the website is really pretty huge. We've got a lot of different stuff that we can access there. However, our ability to search them was just really limited for most of them. And that makes the site, a lot less useful for our research than it might otherwise be. Now, as far as administrative decisions and guidance documents themselves as sources, it is important for you to be familiar with them, but I don't necessarily expect finding these to play a major role in your final. Now, when you're doing research in a regulated area, you would want to consult with your colleagues or find a research guide so you can get an idea of what administrative decisions and what guidance documents are actually out there, what role they play, and where you can find them, where they're most easily accessible. It just varies too much for me to make many general statements that would be really useful, aside from sort of the basic descriptions that I've tried to give you here. Okay, that's all I have for now. Until next time.